The aim of this session, it's called the Ignite session, okay? And it's all about igniting your curiosities and to really inspire deep thinking about how effectively we can serve the people more. So we will, in this session, explore this reset, and it comes with the ideas and the decisions about mergers, and many other key elements that's been discussed in the Humanitarian Reset. The IASC, this is the Interagency Standing Committee that serves as the highest level mechanism for interagency coordination related to humanitarian assistance. Yeah? And this is led by the United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator. Yeah? So I'll just start with just painting a picture about this IASC system. Back in 2005, if we cast our memories back 20 years ago, there was this humanitarian reform. And this was to really work on improving the effectiveness of humanitarian response through greater predictability, accountability, responsibility, and partnership. And at that moment, the humanitarian clusters were born. Yeah? 11 sectorial clusters were organized. And did you know that in Pakistan, after the earthquake in 2005, where 3 million people lost their homes, this was the very first humanitarian cluster in this country. Yeah? And since then, the world, the system, have been learning, evolving how better to organize ourselves. Yeah? And last year, there was 37 countries with a shelter cluster activated. And then until 2024, the partnership, this is the sum of all the partners, were able to serve 17 million people, yeah, with shelter and NFI assistance across the world. Okay, 17 million. I'll just pause with that. 17 million across the world. However, last year happened, yeah, 2025. Certain governments last year cut their humanitarian or international development budgets, yeah? And this had a direct impact. And last year, just for shelter cluster, only 6 million people were able to be served that year. Yeah, a dramatic cut in what we can offer the most vulnerable people on this world. Yeah? So this impact has triggered off the system, the IASC system, to really ask ourselves, how can we become more efficient? And this is the root of the humanitarian reset conversation. So my name's Seki Hirano. I was, until end of December, the Global Shelter Cluster Coordinator on behalf of UNHCR. And I went through the whole process, and I'll be guiding you through this session. Yeah? So today, we have this amazing panel. We're really delighted to have Clémentine Favier. She is the Global Shelter Land Site Coordination Cluster Coordinator on behalf of IOM. She supports global and country-level partners, strengthens coordination and capacity, and contributes to coherent, principled, and people-centered displacement responses. She has more than 15 years of experience in camp coordination, camp management. She has spent significant time in Haiti, South Sudan, Bangladesh, Iraq, and many other places, I'm sure. So welcome, Clémentine. Next we have Henry Yap. we have met him in the panel just before. He is an architect, environmental planner at heart as profession, currently serves as a senior undersecretary at the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development in the Philippines. His role? He leads the cluster on policy, planning, and program implementation. His responsibilities include shaping national housing, land use, and urban development policies. He collaborates with various interagency bodies to develop plans and promotes social development. And I would, at this point, like to thank Mr. Yap for hosting the 2024 Shelter and Settlement Forum very successfully. Yes. So thank you for that. So last but not least, we have Eva Suarez. Eva works as the Global Technical Advisor for Shelter and Settlement at Catholic Relief Services. She is an architect, urban planner with more than 15 years of experience in the humanitarian sector, working across project management, urban analysis, and housing and infrastructure programs. Her work has taken her into camps, urban, rural settings in all the 5 continents. So she strives, and we will hear from her how she does this. She strives in collaborating with multidisciplinary teams and wide range of partners. And she remains committed to participatory and community-driven approaches. So welcome, Eva. So let's get started, and I'll just kind of join. So I'm going to start with a question to Clémentine. Okay, so this humanitarian reset. What were the topics being discussed, and what were the key decisions, I think?
Thanks, Seki. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending in quite big numbers this morning. I think, Seki, I think it's important to keep in mind that the humanitarian reset that you mentioned just a minute ago is both a reform, but also at least is presented as a mindset shift. And I think it's quite important to keep in mind that a lot of the topics that I will mention just now in terms of coordination, accountability, localization, are not necessarily new topics. We have been talking about them for over 20 years, again and again and again. So I think it's important to go back to why the resets. And maybe building on what you just mentioned, Seki, you mentioned that cuts in humanitarian funding were definitely one of the maybe the biggest driver for the reset. But I think we also should mention a few external challenges that led to the reset. I think we also saw an increase in attacks on humanitarian principles, a sharp increase in operational risks. I think we unfortunately saw that in 2024, 2025, there was a massive increase of the number of humanitarian workers killed or wounded in operation across a few, I mean several, but especially in a few contexts. But also, and I think that was linked to funding cuts, an increased politicization of aid. And I think all of these external factors, compounded by the fact that over the last 20 years, the humanitarian system has become more layered and more complex, which has led to relatively slow processes. So all of this together has really kind of created a situation where by early 2025, I think that the reset was initiated around March 2025, there was really no alternative for the system and the interagency standing committee to reflect and see how we could move forward, because I think we had been talking on this topic for 20 years, but now that the patient was in a bit of a life-threatening situation, there was much more eagerness to look at what solution could be put in place. So maybe just to mention a few, and I'm sure we'll come back with other panelists on some of these topics, I think one that you mentioned was coordination. I think the reset was really looking at both global, national, and sub-national level, how can we simplify coordination? So So indeed, at global level, one of the most visible reform or decision was a simplification from the global cluster. We have gone from 11 global clusters, thematic clusters, and 4 areas of responsibility to 8 clusters. One of the most relevant for this forum, as you mentioned, has been the merging of the camp coordination, camp management cluster, of the shelter cluster, and we should not forget of the housing, land and property AOR that were previously under the global protection cluster into one new cluster, the shelter, land and site coordination cluster. But I think the global level was not the only review of the coordination architecture. There's been a lot of discussion for how, at country level, we can have a more flexible, fit-for-purpose coordination. And I think that has been a bit shifting the model where we had a relatively fixed coordination structure, a bit of a copy-paste between all of the country, to really empowering the humanitarian coordinator, which leads the humanitarian response at country level, and the humanitarian country team, which are the kind of senior team at country level that works with the humanitarian coordinator, to really be in charge of defining what coordination model makes the more sense for their context. And that's both in terms of which cluster they should activate, but also should they merge some cluster. For example, in some context of epidemics, maybe some cluster should be merged for a smoother response, but also looking at area-based coordination. In the past, the humanitarian coordination model was very much built around sectoral coordination. And I think while sectarian coordination is not going anywhere, will continue, there is an added value in having both area-based, especially at subnational level, in addition of sectoral coordination. And I think we are seeing now this being rolled out in many countries. In terms of the coordination, and that's particularly relevant at subnational level, there's been a lot of discussion about how can we have more or increased leadership by local and national actors. And I think that really ties to all of the discussion around localization. I think it very much relates to, yes, leadership of coordination structure, so they have more directly a voice in strategic decision making, but also in terms of, obviously, funding allocation. And that's really been a key discussion of the reset to see how more funding could directly go through or to local or national organizations. And I think there's been some very strong commitment taken that, for example, an objective of 70% of funding through the country-based pool fund, which are one-way humanitarian response are funded, would go to local and national actors, which is a significant increase compared to what has been happening in the past. And maybe just a final point before I stop, I think also related to localization is the question of accountability. And I think, actually, Mr. Henry also mentioned it earlier in his previous intervention, you know, this triptych between government, NGO and humanitarian actor and the community. And I think there's been a lot of discussion in the reset on how can we really put the community in the driver's seat and have them more informed what response takes place. And I think what as one of the most significant decisions on that has really been put more clearer accountability, where now, in a way, the burden of proof has a bit been reversed. Where, for example, HET at country level are accountable to ensure and are responsible and can be held accountable for the community to be consulted. So I think maybe these are three thematics that I think are particularly important and relevant to mention.
Hi. Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Clémentine. And I just wanted to follow up a little bit. You do talk about the merger of the three, and in this room, we talk a lot about the integrated programming, right? And I just kind of like wondered if you wanted to speak a little bit more on the three components coming together and the value of that you see, etc. And then also, just wanted to kind of pick your brain on this this plan of humanitarian to development of connection that we've been talking about. Is it humanitarian focus? Where are we on that conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Seki. And maybe let me start by that last point. I think it's a very interesting question because I think the reset has obviously very much refocused. And the word prioritization has been used again and again as part of the reset discussion on reprioritizing the system on life-saving needs, or even that's more the terminology that's being used on the greatest needs. And you will have seen last year, lots of countries went through a prioritization of their HNRP. So they had at the beginning of 2025 or end of 2024 gone through this financial process to identify the cost of humanitarian need in each country. But throughout 2025, in light of those funding cuts, all countries went through this very drastic reprioritization of needs and saying, okay, maybe we were asking for one country 100 million, maybe we are going to have to prioritize among those needs only for a budget of 50. So it was already ongoing. And I think we saw for the 2026 global humanitarian needs overview that there is also this very, very drastic in terms of the total ask. It's much smaller than in the past year. But I think we also see that not only in terms of the prioritization of need, but also in terms of sequencing, that, and you mentioned it a bit earlier, that under the reset and moving forward, it's very likely that the cluster will be less activated, meaning that in the past we might have activated humanitarian coordination structure for maybe crises that were not as big as they would be activated in the future. But also they will be activated for a shorter period of time. And I think that ties to your question on this linkage with peace and recovery and development actors. Because I think as part of the reset is very much this idea that a cluster will definitely be activated when there is a big earthquake or there are floodings and there is really, at the request of the government, there is a need for the international community to work with the government to respond to those needs, but that we will be looking at deactivating much sooner the cluster. Some clusters in some parts of the world have been ongoing for 10, 15 years and are still counting. So that means that we want to embed, or the system wants to embed much earlier on, this idea of transition. But that cannot happen without the involvement of development and peace actors or recovery actors, but also to some extent of some of the institutional financial institutions. And there was a lot of discussion with some of the banks that were here yesterday, with the World Bank, etc. So I think it's really looking at how can we do joint advocacy sooner to those actors, but also, and that has already happening in the last few years, but I think strengthen this joint analysis and data collection to identify, in a way, the connectors with those actors. I think one risk, though, I think, which is a fair question, is how do we make sure that between the phase out of humanitarian in some way and the fact that those more recovery or development actors come in, we don't leave the community a bit hanging without any assistance. And I think this is why I think this discussion is very relevant in this context, because I think in Asia Pacific we have a lot of good examples on Pakistan is one, Nepal, and many others. The Philippines, where I think there's been very good lessons learned on really transitioning from humanitarian, in some cases with active clusters as Pakistan, to now government-led coordination platform that are also looking at, yes, any new or remaining humanitarian needs, but mostly recovery and development.
Oh. Well, really not good. No, thanks, Clémentine. And thanks for highlighting this. Like in this region, as you can see on the map, we've got 42 countries, and we heard from the government just before about how they're actively involved in all of these things. And then, like, really, this kind of map shows this relationship between the system. So at the top here, we have the IASC activated humanitarian clusters as of now, and we have one in Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Syria. And then in the yellow, we have the countries who have had a historical relationship. Yeah? with the government, with the ISD system, and the recovery platform. So we have Bangladesh, Indonesia, Nepal, Pakistan, Pacific region, and the Philippines and Sri Lanka, who has had and have ongoing relationship. So I think this conversation, having Mr. Yap as a government representative here, really kind of seeing like how is this collaboration working? What is this partnership looking like as things move forward? Yeah? So thanks for that, and we'll come back to you for your key messages at the end as well. So let's turn to Undersecretary Yap. You in the Philippines have had quite a relationship with the ISD system and have been running through the process. Tell us how has been.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Well, the Philippines have had more than 2 decades of relationship in humanitarian assistance from our colleagues. Okay. Well, the Philippines is actually the most disaster-prone country for several years now. And as you can see in the timeline, every 2 or 3 years, we have super typhoons passing through the Philippines. So our relationship with the international organization, humanitarian organizations, has been there for years. Not only have they been providing financial assistance to us, but they have been providing the guidance that we actually need based on the experience that they have learned through the ages. So basically what we've done is we've incorporated the learnings that they have provided as well as our own learnings into what we have been working over the years. So in 2010, we had the opportunity of enacting a Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act, a law which prescribes how we are to work on when disasters do happen. But more importantly, the act requires the government to be proactive and not wait for disasters to happen. Unfortunately, we cannot perfect it with just a law. Implementation comes with challenges as well as the realities on ground. So you'll notice these significant timelines, 2010, 2014, and 2021, are actually milestone dates where we now had to reset or to adjust the way we have moved forward. So the humanitarian reset is not actually a one-thing activity. It is a at-need, when required activity. And in our experience, they have been very helpful in the way we have prepared many of our responses. So I'd like to share with you the activity we've done with the help of the World Bank and many of our colleagues from the humanitarian group. We've actually prepared a framework for which we are to handle post-disaster and shelter recovery. It is important that we have a document. Many of us know that we are aware of the risks, but not everybody is prepared to handle the risk when it arrives. So this guidebook that has been prepared with the help of our benefactors from the World Bank and other agencies provide us a guide that we can share with all local government, with all national government agencies. They actually cover how we were to handle immediate after the immediate aftermath of a disaster, moving towards temporary assistance, and ultimately how we would handle permanent assistance. This guidebook is widely shared among our constituents as well as key players in our industry. And to be able to work on this framework, we've actually covered and dissected it into 3 parts: being prepared, being able to respond, and to provide the capacity strengthening that we are required to immediately respond when this happens. So we are very fortunate that we are able to develop this system together with the experience of the humanitarian groups and our multilateral agencies so that we can immediately correct and adjust as needed. Before I end, let me show you this last slide, and maybe we can have a conversation later. This photo is not about lines. This is the path of the typhoon that passes to the Philippines over the years. Somewhere at the back of this line is the Philippines. So you can just imagine the amount of typhoon that passes to the Philippines. You cannot even locate where the Philippines is because of the number of lines it passes. I think this is the story that we would like to share. We may be aware of the risks, but not everybody is prepared. And I think I would like to open this conversation later on how we can handle such a scenario. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yap. Very powerful. The lines, you cannot even see the country behind, but there is lives behind. So thank you, and it's really fantastic to hear about the continued relationship between the system, and that it's not a one-off, and it's not a one-moment event. And I think we will take away this message. So I would like to turn to Eva while I try to navigate slides. So Eva, you come from an INGO. I just kind of wondering, this reset conversations, what has it triggered in your organization?
Hello, good morning everyone, and thanks Seki also for the question. For our organization, and I think that also this can also extrapolate to organizations, no, like ours, like the reset, or our main takeaway after the reset discussions is the importance of keeping coordination. So even if now, coordination is very important, so now we need to focus more efforts also on strengthening local coordination mechanisms. Somehow also we see the reset is also an opportunity. No, it's an opportunity that invites us also to look beyond, cluster structures, no, like Clémentine was mentioning, no, simplification of coordination, shifting to more locally led structures. So it's that, no, what we are somehow focusing, no, and also doing this kind of more meaningful support to these local coordination structures. And but one thing also that is very important, no, saying that is for this to truly work, we cannot think that it's just shifting responsibilities, no, from cluster or more centralized structures to just locally led structures. Shift of responsibilities, no, it's not that. It's also resources, no? That means the localization authority needs also to be aligned with the resources, technical and financial resources for this to truly work. And then I think it's also very important what we are seeing here today, no? With we are seeing several platforms from different countries, obviously since housing reconstruction recovery platform, also experiences from our colleagues from the Philippines, from Nepal. So what we are seeing here is if we as agencies, organizations, we work alongside government, local organizations, we try to set common standards, information management system is the way to move forward. So our role, Seki, as we see it, is more as facilitators, no, enabling this process. Maybe we would also like to add, no, whilst we are also having all these more high-level discussions between us, this is also about people, no, what this can mean for the communities that we serve. And I think that there's two important factors to consider. One is that if local grows stronger, also communities are more prepared, no, to respond, to recover. And another factor also is a more dignified support. It's an approach that is you lead and we support. We are here to support, facilitate, but it's not an approach of we lead and you support. So I think that's also a key factor. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Eva, and really fascinating to see that it triggers this kind of really commitment to what you always wanted to do, in a way, become that facilitator. And I think in future funding might come back in, it might not come back in, but for sure we have always, as a humanitarian community, have always struggled to support everybody, right? Like probably in the shelter sector, about 10% is the maximum, maybe 20% in normal kind of circumstance. So it's really fascinating to see this commitment. Maybe it will trigger some thoughts in other organizations as well. So yes, maybe I'll come back to Mr. Yap. You've heard a bit of what Eva was saying about preparedness, etc. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Yes, actually, one of the big realizations today is the recognition that there is a tightening of humanitarian budget, and of course, there needs from us the prioritization of how we will handle our own internal budgets from the country's perspective. While they are there to provide the support, it heightens that we have to be very clear on what are our priorities. The disasters that we see, the challenges that we will have will continue, but resources will never be finite. Will always be finite, and that we will have difficulty getting more budget in the future as this disaster and issues come about. So our concern right now have to be converted into a challenge, and a challenge where rather than waiting for money, we have to be prepared. We have to prepare to work together, and we need to face these challenges head on. It is important that we look into our experience, our collective vision, our collective cooperation, as well as the need to address from the perspective of our target beneficiaries, the people who are affected, the people who are at the ground. It is this perspective that we have to do. It is the reset in our minds, in our hearts, that we have to handle. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. And then for some final words from Clémentine.
Thanks a lot, Seki, and maybe taking that opportunity just because I did not necessarily answer earlier the question about the merging of the global cluster. I mean, I think some people in the three sectors, so that merging as a threat, I think we can also choose to see it as an opportunity. I think we had seen that in many contexts, and we had already some merged CCCM and shelter cluster in quite a few contexts. It's the case in Myanmar, for example, as well. And I think what is particularly relevant is because I think the topic of displacement management is de facto very much linked during the humanitarian phases, but even more when we're talking about recovery from a humanitarian crisis or a disaster, with the issue of shelters and settlement and housing, land and property, being because people are going to have to, for example, leave displacement sites or camps where they might have been living during the emergency crisis and might either be returning home, where they will need help in terms of housing reconstruction, or there will be some housing, land and property issue to be solved in terms of ownership of housing. Or, for example, when people are unable to return to their area of origin, and we are looking at, in some cases, relocating those people, these IDPs, to other location or transforming the displacement site into a settlement. So I think lots of connections are existing, and I think there are lots of synergies that I think this global cluster and this merging will allow us to leverage. And I think listening to all of the discussion yesterday and looking forward to additional discussion later today, I think I already heard so many of these kind of connections and how bringing it all together makes a lot of sense. And maybe a final word is, I think, as you mentioned, I think Asia Pacific is probably the region where we have seen the most progress in terms of really having this both humanitarian recovery development, government-led coordination platform that are very much contextualized. And I think as now there is this push of really trying to not stay in this consistent or long-term humanitarian coordination architecture, this region has a lot to offer to some of the other contexts and other regions I think many of the organizations here are working in. And I think we definitely from the global cluster, but I think the whole humanitarian sector would benefit from further exchange within the region, but also between regions. Yeah, so I think looking forward to continuing the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Clémentine. Yes, I totally agree that this recovery platform is something special, like something that really is working from Nepal to Pakistan, and an opportunity to share this globally. So thanks for that. And yeah, we'll turn to Eva for her last words before we close. Yeah.
Thanks, Seki. It's like maybe a very short message, no? Just a couple of lines, but the reset is not about dismantling like coordination, no? It's about rethinking coordination. If we like support, resource, and respect local coordination system, then our role becomes as like facilitators, enablers of these systems, and we can better also focus our efforts with the communities that we serve. Thank you.
Keep on. Yeah. So thank you. So I hope some of this has resonated in any part of your work. Something to be really critical about, something that I heard is, let's take the opportunity of something that was out of our control, but somehow turning it around to make it helpful, to make our work to serve the communities better, and more efficient, more prepared, and people-centered. So let us thank all the panelists, and we hope that you really enjoyed some of these thoughts that's going through the system. So thank you.